There comes a moment when a familiar place remains the same, yet no longer offers shelter within. Billy Graham observed that when comfort disappears without anything changing on the outside, displacement begins inside the person, discreetly, almost imperceptibly. The question arises without warning and does not ask for an immediate answer. Why doesn't this comfort me anymore? The routine remains intact, the paths are the same, the memories are still there, but the experience no longer resonates in the same way. There is no obvious rupture, only the strange sensation of being present and at the same time out of place. This discomfort does not usually arrive abruptly. It settles in while life goes on. The person continues to frequent the same spaces, repeating familiar gestures, recognizing every detail around them. Nothing seems out of order. And yet, the sense of being held or welcomed diminishes. It does not disappear all at once. It simply loses strength. The conflict is born precisely from this contradiction. The environment remains familiar, but the inner experience changes. What once offered rest becomes merely functional. The space fulfills its practical role, but no longer touches something deeper. The person notices this in small moments, almost always ignored. A late afternoon that brings no relief. A return home that does not produce rest. An old place that no longer evokes a sense of belonging. Many live with this without realizing they are living with it. There is no easy name for this feeling. It does not present itself as clear sadness, nor as obvious dissatisfaction. It is a contained, polite discomfort that does not interrupt commitments or alter the appearance of the day. Because of that, it goes unnoticed, even by the one who feels it. This conflict is common. It appears in people of different ages, different histories, different routines. It does not choose extreme moments. It usually emerges when everything seems relatively stable. Perhaps that is why it is so difficult to recognize. There is no obvious external reason to explain why something has stopped being comforting. The person tries to rationalize it. They think it is just accumulated fatigue. They attribute it to the repetition of days, to responsibilities, to the passage of time. In many cases, they accept this explanation without questioning it. After all, nothing is broken enough to demand immediate attention. Life keeps functioning, but internally, something begins to drift away. It is not the place that changes. It is the way of being in it. The body occupies the space, but the sense of presence weakens. The mind recognizes the setting, but finds no rest. This distancing happens so gradually that it is almost never noticed at the beginning. That is why so many people carry this feeling for long periods. It blends into ordinary days, fulfilled commitments, trivial conversations. It does not trigger alarms. It simply accompanies. And little by little, it turns places that were once welcoming into neutral spaces, correct, functional, but empty of emotional meaning. This is the conflict. Not dramatic, not loud, just constant. A subtle estrangement from what has always been known, lived and repeated, now without the same ability to offer comfort. Billy Graham used to observe this kind of distancing not as a failure of the place, nor as a mistake of the person, but as an internal signal that deserves quiet attention. For him, there were moments when human beings remained inserted in the same contexts, surrounded by the same references, yet could no longer truly perceive themselves there. Not for lack of effort, but because of excess adaptation. In the way Billy Graham understood human behavior, discomfort arose when inner awareness began to drift away from the external rhythm of life. The person remained physically present, fulfilling roles, occupying spaces, but stopped listening to themselves with clarity. The place remained familiar, but the inner contact with it became superficial. He saw this as a silent process, not something that explodes, but something that dissolves. When attention turns almost exclusively to what needs to be done, to what is expected, to what keeps everything running, personal listening loses space. The external world imposes itself, and the inner world is consulted only in moments of urgency, if it is consulted at all. Billy Graham did not treat this experience as something rare. On the contrary, for him, it was one of the most common conflicts of modern human beings, precisely because it causes no visible interruptions. Life remains organized, the days keep a certain order, but the person begins to feel disconnected from their own experience of being there. In his observation, Discomfort with familiar places was not about the physical space, but about the absence of inner presence. When awareness no longer accompanies the body, the environment loses depth. What once welcomed now merely exists around the person. They recognize the setting, but no longer recognize themselves within it. This inner distancing, according to Billy Graham, is not resolved through immediate changes or quick explanations. It begins with perception, with the ability to notice that something has changed in the way of feeling, not in the way of living. It is an invitation to listening, not to action, to a more attentive inward gaze, not an attempt to fix the exterior. That is why he spoke so often about inner awareness and inner silence, not as formal practices, but as states of attention. When this attention is lost, the world remains the same, but the human experience becomes shallower. And it is at this point that places once welcoming stop offering comfort, even while remaining exactly as they have always been. In everyday life, this inner distancing usually blends into routine without creating friction. The day begins, tasks are completed, commitments accumulate. Work demands constant attention. Conversations happen, decisions need to be made. Everything stays in motion, even when comfort no longer accompanies it. The person wakes up and recognizes the room, the house, the path to where they need to go. Every detail is familiar. Still, there is a strange sense of repetition without involvement. The place is there, but the experience of being in it feels distant. There is no discomfort clear enough to interrupt the day. There is only a lack of connection that keeps being postponed. Over time, this extends to other spaces. The workplace, which once offered some sense of stability, becomes merely functional. The familiar route turns into an automatic interval between one commitment and another. Even moments of rest lose density. The body stops, but the mind remains occupied. Fatigue comes not only from effort, but from the absence of real engagement. Billy Graham observed that when life is organized only around what needs to be done, there is little space left to notice how one is actually living what one does. It is not just about an excess of activities, but about the way they occupy everything. Attention becomes fragmented. The person begins to exist in many places at once, without being fully present in any of them. At night, when stimuli diminish, this feeling often appears more clearly. The day ends, the environment grows quieter, and what was ignored finds room to surface, not as a structured thought, but as a discomfort that is hard to locate. The place is the same as always, but it does not produce true rest. Perhaps you have felt something similar without giving it much importance. A return home that does not bring relief, a weekend that does not restore, a familiar space that does not offer shelter, not because there is something wrong with it, but because the way of being there has changed over time. Modern life favors this kind of distancing. Constant repetition, the pressure for continuous functioning, the need to respond to everything leave little space to notice one's own inner state. In this way, discomfort accumulates without being noticed. And places that once brought comfort become merely part of the scenery. Correct, organized, but emotionally distant. There are moments when everything around grows quieter. The lights dim. The noises of the day fade away. The demands pause for a few hours. It is in these intervals that the discomfort usually appears with greater clarity. The person is alone. They do not need to respond. They do not need to decide. They do not need to sustain any role. The body rests, but something remains tense. The mind tries to slow down, but encounters a strange emptiness. The place is familiar. The bedroom, the living room, the house. Nothing has changed there. And yet, comfort does not come. In the early hours of the morning, when there are no distractions left to fill the time, the sensation emerges of having functioned on autopilot all day long. Actions remain correct, roles are fulfilled, but real presence seems reduced. It is not agitation. It is accumulated wear. At this point, fatigue is not linked only to physical or mental effort. It comes from repetition without involvement, from remaining in familiar spaces without feeling that they truly offer shelter. The person realizes they are still there, but without finding inner rest. There is no elaborate thought. There is no conclusion. only a simple realization that is difficult to ignore. When everything stops, it becomes clear that something has been tiring for a long time. When this discomfort is ignored for too long, it does not disappear. It settles in. It becomes part of the way the person lives their days. The impact is not immediate, but it accumulates. Gradually, a sense of wear appears without a specific cause. Everything seems manageable, but nothing feels truly sustaining. Remaining in places that no longer offer inner comfort generates a continuous tension. The person learns to function despite it, learns to adapt, maintains the routine, fulfills commitments, responds to what is expected. On the outside, almost nothing changes. On the inside, the experience becomes shallower, less involved. Over time, this distancing begins to affect the way the person relates to themselves. A difficulty arises in recognizing what they feel. Emotions become less distinct, not because they have disappeared, but because there is no space for them to be perceived. The day occupies everything. Functioning occupies everything. The inner world keeps being postponed. Billy Graham observed that this kind of wear often goes unnoticed, precisely because it does not cause ruptures. There is no clear moment of breakdown. There is continuity, and it is this continuity that exhausts. Living in familiar spaces without feeling a sense of belonging generates a constant effort of adaptation, even when no one notices. Ignoring this condition for long periods can lead to a broader sense of distancing. The person begins to move through their own life like someone who knows the path well, but no longer feels its meaning. Places are recognized, schedules are followed, conversations happen, but everything seems to occur at a certain distance. This wear is not dramatic. It does not manifest in obvious crises. It appears in the difficulty of feeling present, in the weakening of the bond with what once brought some relief. Remaining in environments that no longer comfort requires constant energy to keep everything functioning, and that energy, over time, is consumed without replenishment. The result is a persistent sense of emotional fatigue, not the kind that asks for immediate rest, but the kind that accompanies the person even after pauses, even in moments that were once restorative. It is the effect of continuing to live in familiar places that have stopped offering inner shelter, without this ever being recognized or acknowledged. At some point, even without intention, the person begins to notice a subtle difference between being alive and being present. The days keep happening, actions remain organized, but the inner experience feels distant. There is awareness of what is being done, but little contact with what is felt while doing it. Billy Graham drew attention to this kind of perception not as a problem to be fixed, but as a signal of awareness. Inner consciousness does not arise in moments of haste. It appears when there is space to notice one's own state, without judgment, without the need for an immediate response. At this deeper level, the person begins to recognize that the discomfort with familiar places is not only about physical space. It is about how they encounter themselves while being there. The body occupies the place, but presence feels partial. Something observes from the outside, while the rest continues functioning. This perception brings no conclusion. It does not point to clear paths. It simply reveals an important difference. Existing is not the same as being involved. Fulfilling is not the same as feeling. Remaining is not the same as truly inhabiting one's own moment. When this awareness arises, even briefly, it does not demand action. It simply invites listening, to noticing how one is living what one lives, to recognizing that it is possible to be in a familiar place and still feel distant from oneself. And this realization by itself already changes the way discomfort is perceived. Perhaps the question is not only why certain places have stopped offering comfort. Perhaps it points to something simpler and at the same time harder to face. The way one is living in those places. The way one is present, or merely remaining. Billy Graham observed that many human conflicts do not emerge as clear problems, but as a gradual distancing from one's own experience. Nothing needs to be wrong for something to lose its meaning. Sometimes discomfort appears simply as a sign that inner attention has become too small in the face of the rhythm of the days. This reflection does not end here. It usually continues afterward, in ordinary moments, when the person returns to the same spaces and notices something different in their own way of being there. Not as an answer, but as perception, without haste, without closure. I suggest that you subscribe to the channel to continue following reflections like this, shared at a calm pace with depth, observing human experiences that often go unnoticed, always inspired by the simple and direct ways Billy Graham understood the human interior. This space exists for those who feel the need to think more carefully, without noise and without rushed conclusions. If at any moment in this video something connected with your own experience, the comments are open as a place for expression. It can be a short sentence, a perception, or simply a record of what stayed with you. Sometimes, naming it is already enough to not carry it alone.